Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Art by Galen. My name is Galen. I'm the creator and writer behind the series Baku Dreamwalkers, also the creator of the Creating Comics workbook that goes along with this series. Welcome back to Creating Comics Start to Finish. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about speech bubbles. We're also going to be covering font selection, sound effects, and things like that. So let's hop right over to Photoshop and let's get started. I've got some bubbles that I've made. I'm going to tell you right now, I think personally it's best to do vector shapes for your bubbles just because they're so much easier to manipulate. They're easily resized and changed as opposed to drawing them in raster. Raster just means drawing it in pixels as opposed to vector paths. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make these. There's the obvious like simple way. You can choose the shape tool, and on Photoshop that's the U key. Probably going to want to start with the ellipse, but you can use other shapes too. You can start off with a basic shape like this, and that gives you a little oval shape that's got 4 vector points here, each with little arms that can be manipulated, and you can even move these points around. Some people use just basic ovals like this. I'm personally I'm not a giant fan of perfect ovals. I like them to be a little bit misshapen. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll draw out an oval like this, and I'll select my pen tool, that is P in Photoshop to select. If you hold the Control key or Command if you're on Mac and you click onto one of these vector points, it'll reveal the arms. You can use the arms to move and manipulate the shape. If you want to make sure it moves perfectly vertically or horizontally, you can hold the Shift key also. Holding Control, we can click this point. We can grab this arm here and reshape it. I'm going to do that all the way around and get a sort of an oblong kind of shape. It feels a little bit more comic-y, a little bit less of a perfect oval. And you can also just freeform draw with the pen tool. You can use it and just click and drag to create different shapes of different types. But if you've never played with this before, you're going to notice that it's pretty wonky, and it takes some getting used to. I'm going to say right now, I am not a pro in vector art at all. It is not a strong suit of mine. But I am able to make and use vectors to create good looking speech bubbles. Let's say, for instance, you wanted more of a POW sort of effect. We can start with an oval, go to our pen tool, and up here I've got auto add and delete checked. And what that does is if I hover over, if I have the shape selected, and you can tell it's selected by the ring around the shape and you can see the vector points. All right, so if I've got the shape selected, I should be able to hover over the path and I can add a new point. So I can go point, 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 and do the same thing over here. If I hold Control, I can grab one of those points and move it out. If I hold Alt and click it, I can remove the arms, and that will give it more of a sharp point because the arms are what control the arc and kind of projection of the shape from the point to the next point. If it has no arms, it's just going to go to that point and then directly towards the next one based on the arm at the next point. So like if we look here, this can manipulate it that way. We can make them sharper if we want. And you can see pretty quickly how doing this all the way around can give you a pretty cool little effect. Sort of that kind of blam sound effect bubble kind of thing. So without going into too much detail with this, another thing that I would recommend is if you're going to have a border around your speech bubbles, do it with a layer style. You can apply a stroke around the bubbles up here in the shape information. Like you can set it to a certain pixel width. You can even make it dotted or dashed if you want to. And that's a perfectly fine way of doing it. Another way of doing it is choosing your shape, double clicking on the layer, and then going over here to stroke. I set a small stroke. I think I use about 4 pixels, and I generally set it on the outside of the bubble. And then I hit OK. And then what I can do from there is I've got that shape with it. I can right click, I can copy the layer style. And then any other bubbles that I have that I want to apply that to, I can right click and paste layer style. And it applies the same stroke to that. Another thing I can do is if I have multiple shapes that I want to just save some layers and put them all together, I can click all of them together by holding Shift, and I can hit Control E and it will merge them together. Now they're still shapes. See, if I choose my pen tool and I click on them, you can still see all the vector points and everything. It's just they're all one group. And now the layer style can be applied to the entire group at once. So if we delete it off of there, we can paste it on there and it does it to all of them. And that comes in handy whenever you're ready to start adding in the tails. And these are the little things that shoot off of the speech bubble toward the character to indicate who's talking. So like right now I've got it as an independent shape. And so if I choose that and the speech bubble and I paste the layer style, you see how it actually gives it the outline around that entire shape. But if I merge them, it puts them together and you don't have that annoying piece in front of the bubble anymore. And so that's a pretty easy way to get started with bubbles. Now we're going to start talking about adding some text to your bubbles. Now you can do your text first, you can do your bubbles first. It's really a personal preference. I don't really see anything wrong with going either way. But I do know that no matter which direction, you're almost inevitably going to end up adjusting your bubbles after the text is done. So I typically will do the text first, but before we do that, I want to give a little bit of a pointer here about font choices. If we take this text here, it's a font that I am licensed to use, and that is another point that I want to make. Make sure that you have a license to use the fonts on your books, because you don't want to put in a ton of hard work into your comic and open it up to potentially being sued in the future by someone who created the font that you used without a license. There are websites like defont.com where you can search and you can find open license fonts, or you can go to websites and companies like Comicraft and you can purchase the rights to use specific fonts that are developed particularly for comic books. And the only reason I'm talking about fonts right now, I don't want to tell you how to choose the best one for your book. All I want to convey is that fonts carry an energy with them, and your font choices are going to be important. This is a pretty harmless phrase in a very standard font like this. Like it says, "You will always be mine." But if we use a font more like this, that's a little bit more handwritten and it's kind of cutesy, this feels almost more like a love note. You will always be mine. But if we use a font like this is a threat. This is a threat. This is much more like darker energy. And this is a very extreme demonstration of this, but it is something that I want you to be mindful of when choosing a font for your book. Obviously, you're probably not going to use something like these bottom two for your speech bubbles, but especially when it comes to doing your sound effects and your actions, it's something to be mindful of. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily use a highly stylized font for your actions. I use this one. I use the same one, I just distort it. But anyway, so let's actually take some text and apply it to a page. Now you might recognize this page. It's the same one that I used in the video about coloring and getting your page ready for coloring. We're just going to add text to this. So I'm going to delete this folder here that had all of our templates and stuff on it. And then on top of that, I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to get my text tool. So I'm actually going to start here. I'm going to start in this panel. There is some text up here, but that is going to have a little bit of a spoiler. I want to start here. First thing in the script is Alessa, this character over here, is going to be saying something to Penelope. So it's the first thing that I want to be read, so it needs to be up here. We've got this text here, and this is what Alessa is saying. You're really going to do this? I can't talk you out of it. I want to arrange these into more of a circular sort of shape. And I've got them on different layers too, so like one sentence per. Sometimes you can do a couple together, but I really try not to put more than one or two sentences in each speech bubble if I can avoid it. Sometimes there might be a lot of text and you're working with limited space, but it's still a good idea to try to separate it into different bubbles if you can. So shaping it, how do we do that? Let's double click into our text. And the way I do it is I delete the space out between two words and I hit enter. And that creates, something like this. It's a little bit bottom heavy, but that's okay. Next one, I can't talk you out of it. I think we're going to do the same way. I can't talk you out of it. That actually lines up pretty well. That goes right about here. So now that I've got the text kind of positioned where I want, I'm going to come up behind it. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to group these, and we're going to call the group text. That way we can turn off all the text at once if we want to, and we can hide it. And even though we've only got one layer, I'm going to group this one, and I'm going to call it bubbles. For the first bubble, I'm going to get my oval tool, and I'm going to draw an oval. And the other one I'll draw by hand. I've got my pen tool. I'm going to hold Control. I'm going to click into the shape. I'm going to click on to these, and I'm going to just kind of move them around a little. I'm going to extend some of the arms. I'm going to move some of the points around and just try to create a nice original shape for this bubble. If you hold Shift while you're moving the arms, you can keep them perfectly horizontal or vertical depending on what your desired effect is. It's got a decent amount of padding to it. Probably should add a little bit more though. I try to keep it where got basically the width of a letter between the edge of every letter and the edge of the bubble. This way it's not crowded and it doesn't feel very claustrophobic. It's easy to read and it doesn't feel uncomfortable to the reader to look at. All right, so this next area, we're going to start by just drawing. So I'm going to click up at the top where I want the top of the bubble to be, and I'm going to click a point. Now, let me show you something real quick. If I click another point and pull, you'll see like I have these arcs. I can create a curve. If I don't do that, it just makes a straight line. Now, this isn't a straight line because it had an arm. If I do it again, you'll see it's a straight line. And then when I come all the way back around, you'll see a little circle pop up next to the tool, and that's when it completes the shape. I'm going to back up a little bit because I want to redo that first line. See, if we just click it and then we click again, we get straight lines. But if we click and hold and drag, we get handles on that point. So now I can come over to the side, click and hold down to the bottom, click over here, we'll click and hold, drag. And then at the top one, I should just be able to click because it's going to incorporate the arms that are already there. And so now I can come in and make the adjustments. And it's really a preference, right? It's going to depend on what do you enjoy doing? What do you feel like you get the best results from? Do you like drawing them by hand? Do you like starting with an oval first? And so now that I've got this done, I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a couple of little connectors. So I'm going to go point, point. I'm going to make a new one and I'm going to pull it to where it indents a little bit. Now I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to click. You see that little arrow pops up on my tool, and I'm going to click here. That gets rid of that secondary arm. I'm going to click over here. That gives me a straight line. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning and I'm going to click and pull to indent it. And that gives me sort of a little hourglass shape for the bubble. And that's all I want to connect it. I'm going to come down to the bottom and I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to go click and I'm going to click and pull. We're going to make a little bit of a curve down toward Alessa's face. I'm going to hold the Alt key, click on that point to get rid of that arm. Come back up here and click and hold until I get a nice shape out of that. I like that little point. That's pretty good. Hold the Alt key, click, and then back to the beginning point, click. And that completes that shape. So now we've got a bunch of shapes. We've got 4 of them. The top circle, the bottom circle, the connecting piece, and the tail. Now I'm going to highlight all of these. Click the top one. I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to click the bottom one. And I'm going to hit Control E. And that groups them. Still individual pieces. You can see the outline of their paths, but they're all on one layer. And so now if I right click and I go paste layer style, that same style that we copied earlier, it applies that 4 pixel stroke to that bubble. And so it's bam, ready to go. And basically I go through my whole page and I can do this. Like I just lay out the flow, the way that I want the bubbles to be read. So let's talk for just a moment about flow of your speech bubbles. We're going to have a bubble here, a bubble here. We'll have Penelope's response, have another comment from Alessa, and another comment from Alessa. Probably something here, and another speech bubble here. Top to bottom, left to right. That applies to the page, but it also applies within the panels. So that means that in this current order, this is how they would ideally be read and how most people are probably going to understand the flow of the panel. This is a sample page out of the Creating Comics Start to Finish workbook where it talks about drawing your pages and laying out your speech bubbles. Now, you'll see that the red numbers here show the order of the sample page. And bubbles 1 and 5, they're on the right, they're not on the left, but because they're higher up within their panels than the other bubbles are, they will get read first. So that is that left to right, top to bottom. So hopefully with this information, I've given you a good starting point to be able to get your comics lettered and get the speech bubbles in place and really start getting into those final stages of right before going to print, which is really exciting to start seeing it all come together. Here's some examples of using speech bubbles in different styles and different ways to convey mood, emotion, and different types of things within the book. You can use them in different ways. You can really, if you think about your viewer's experience, you can find different ways to kind of enhance the mood that you're trying to convey. And what you see here is the same font that I've used to letter the rest of the book. It's just bold, and it's been manipulated in height and spacing in different ways to give a little bit of movement. And it's at a point where Penelope crashes into this mailbox and actually shatters it. So it's a pretty hard hit. Here's another page with the same font, but this time I did manipulate it a little bit, and then I converted it into raster to be able to apply some effects to it. Here's another page with the same font. It's only 3 letters, and it's behind her, but it just says "pow" because she punches her boyfriend in the face as he's sleeping. And I've done a lot of texturing here. I've added some halftones and some really bright colors. I really wanted to convey the energy. This one here is also done with the same font. This one I rasterized, that way I could use the Smudge Tool to swipe through the text and create this sort of movement or smear effect. Whatever you want to call it, it helps add to the movement of the page. Pop over here. This is one more time. This is the same font. Again, we played with the smudging a little bit, but the goal of this one was to convey a sort of rumble in the growl of the wolf, just kind of like snarl. It wanted to really have that sort of vibration to it. And some people may not even see that text, but it's there. It's there, and it helps convey the mood. And every single one of those is done with the same font, which is really cool. Occasionally, now this is from Baku issue 3, occasionally I like to draw them by hand. If you look here in this panel, she's popping open this energy drink, and it actually says the word energy. So I'll draw it in a red color so you can see it. So like, got the E, the N, the E, the R, and the Y, and an exclamation point. And again, it's not something that needed to be there. I like having fun with my book, and that was just something I thought would be fun to do. So hopefully this video has helped you get started with setting up your text and your speech bubbles and sound effects and all that stuff. And one thing that I really want you to consider with this is that you have put a lot of time into writing, drawing, and organizing the rest of your comic book, and it would be a shame to start skimping on doing the lettering and the speech bubbles. And in all honesty, bad choices with speech bubbles, with font choices, with the arrangement of the bubbles within the page, if it makes it cumbersome for the reader to actually get through the book and enjoy the story, they're not very likely to want to continue with it. So it's definitely worth either taking the time to do it yourself, or if you have the means, hiring someone else to do it for you. I do want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, ComixWellSpring. If you have purchased any of my comics issues of Baku Dreamwalkers, or my Creating Comics Start to Finish workbook that goes along with this series, all of these have been printed by the sponsor, and I just want to say a huge thank you to them for supporting this series and for helping me to be able to help you create your comics and get them into print and into the hands of your readers. And if this happens to be your first video in this series and you're not familiar with ComixWellSpring, they are a comic printing company, but they also do lots of different accessories. They do trading cards, stickers. They do gear for your booths when you do conventions. They do all sorts of things. And they've got a really low minimum order. You only have to order 25 copies of your book in order to get it printed and in your hands. And on top of that, they have excellent customer service. I myself, I have printed 11 or 12 books with them over the past few years. I've been exceptionally happy with the quality of the books, and the readers that have picked up my books have been very happy with the quality of them as well. So thank you again to ComixWellSpring for sponsoring this series. And if you want to get a copy of any of my comics, Baku Dreamwalkers, or the Creating Comics Workbook, you can check out cwsbookstore.com, which is another service that ComixWellSpring provides. You can actually upload your digital comics there and put them up for sale, or you can order a print run of your book through ComixWellSpring, have them store it in their warehouse, and they will ship it to your readers when orders are placed. Which is pretty great because when you finish your book, you can set up a storefront on their site, you can put your books up for sale, and you don't have to worry about managing inventory or dealing with shipping and packaging or anything like that. I will have a more detailed video on using CWS Bookstore in the future, so be on the lookout for that. And until then, I hope you have a fantastic day and keep creating and take care.